Hey there, everybody. So now that I have a new microphone and things are a little bit more settled in, I'm gonna go back and re-record the ship who sang, at least until I get to the point where I had the better mic. Um, so since I'm replacing the recording, this is actually one of my favorite sci-fi stories, mostly because kind of the core idea of it is by helping others we help ourselves. So the stories are very much about trying to reach out for a human connection and use that as the means to fix a given problem and looking out for each other. So chapter 1, the ship who sang. She was born a thing, and as such would be condemned if she failed to pass the encephalograph test required of newborn babes. There was always the possibility that though the limbs were twisted, the mind was not, and though the ears could hear only dimly, the eyes see vaguely, the mind behind them was receptive and alert. The electroencephalogram was entirely favorable, unexpectedly so, and the news was brought to the waiting, grieving parents. There was the final harsh decision to give their child euthanasia or permit it to become an encapsulated brain, a guiding mechanism in any one of a number of curious professions. As such, their offspring would suffer no pain, live a comfortable existence in a metal shell for several centuries, performing unusual services to central worlds. She lived and was given a name, Helva. For her first 3 vegetable months, she waved her crabbed claws, kicked weakly with her clubbed feet, and enjoyed the usual routine of the infant. She was not alone, for there were 3 other such children in the big city's special nursery. Soon they were all removed to Central Laboratory School, where their delicate transformation began. One of the babies died in the initial transferal, but of Helva's class, 17 thrived in the metal shells. Instead of kicking feet, Helva's neural responses started her wheels. Instead of grabbing with hands, she manipulated mechanical extensions. As she matured, more and more neural synapses would be adjusted to operate other mechanisms that went into the maintenance and running of a spaceship. For Helva was destined to be a brain half of a scout ship, partnered with a man or woman, whichever she chose, as the mobile half. She would be among the elite of her kind. Her initial intelligence tests registered above normal, and her adaptation index was unusually high. As long as her development within her shell lived up to expectations, and there were no side effects from the pituitary tinkering, Helva would live a rewarding, rich, and unusual life, a far cry from what she would have what she would have faced as an ordinary, normal human being. However, no diagram of her brain patterns, no early IQ tests, recorded certain essential facts about Helva that Central must eventually learn. They would have to bide their official time, and see, trusting that the massive doses of shell psychology would suffice her too as the necessary bulwark against her unusual confinement and the pressures of her profession. A ship run by a human brain could not run rogue or insane with the power and resources Central had to build into their scout ships. Brain ships were, of course, long past the experimental stages. Most babies survived the perfected techniques of pituitary manipulation that kept their bodies small, eliminating the necessity of transfers from smaller to larger shells. And very, very few of them were lost when the final connection was made to the control panels of a ship or industrial combine. Shell people resembled mature dwarves in size, whatever their natal deformities were, but the well-oriented brain would not have changed places with the most perfect body in the universe. So, for happy years, Helva scooted around in her shell with her classmates, playing such games as Stall, Power Seek, studying her lessons in trajectory, propulsion techniques, computation, logistics, mental hygiene, basic alien psychology, philology, space history, law, traffic codes, all of the etceteras that eventually became compounded into a reasoning, logical, informed citizen. Not so obvious to her, but of more importance to her teachers, Helva ingested the precepts of her conditioning as easily as she absorbed her nutrient fluid. She would one day be grateful to the patient drone of the subconscious level instruction. Helva's civilization was not without busy do-good associations, exploring possible inhumanities to terrestrial as well as extraterrestrial citizens. One such group, Society for the Preservation of the Rights of Intelligent Minorities, or SPRIN, got all incensed over shelled children when Helva was just turning 14. When they were uh, when they were forced to, Central Worlds shrugged its shoulders and arranged a tour of the laboratory schools and set the tour off to a big start by showing the members case histories, complete with photographs. Very few of the committees ever looked past the first few photos. Most of their original objections about shells were overridden by relief that these hideous, to them, bodies were mercifully concealed. Helva's class was doing fine arts, a selective subject, in her crowded program. She had activated one of her microscopic tools, which she would later use for minute repairs to various parts of her control panel. Her subject was large, a copy of the Last Supper, and her canvas small, the head of a tiny screw. She tuned her sight to the proper degree. As she worked, she absent-mindedly crooned, producing a curious sound. Shell people used their own vocal cords and diaphragms, but sound issued through microphones rather than mouths. Helva's hum, then, had a curious vibrancy, a warm, dulcet quality even in its aimless chromatic wanderings. "Why, what a lovely voice you have," said one of the female visitors. Helva looked up and caught a fascinating panorama of regular, dirty craters of a flaky pink surface. Her hum became a gurgle of surprise. She instinctively regulated her sight until the skin lost its cratered look and the pores assumed normal proportions. "Yes, we have quite a few years of vocal training, madam," remarked Helva calmly. Vocal peculiarities often become excessively irritating during prolonged interstellar distances and must be eliminated. I enjoyed my lessons. Although this was the first time Helva had seen unshelled people, she took this experience calmly. Any other reaction would have been reported instantly. I meant that you had a nice singing voice, dear," the lady said. "Oh, thank you. Would you like to see my work?" Helva asked politely. She instinctively sheered away from personal discussions, but she filed the comment away for further meditation. "Work?" asked the lady. "I am currently reproducing the Last Supper on the head of a screw." "Oh, I say!" the lady twittered. Helva turned her vision back to magnification and surveyed her copy critically. "Of course, some of my color values do not match the old masters, and the perspective is faulty, but I believe it to be a fair copy." The lady's eyes, unmagnified, bugged out. "Oh, I forget," said Helva's voice, and Helva's voice really was contrite. If she could have blushed, she would have. "You people don't have adjustable vision." The monitor of this discourse grinned with pride and amusement, as Helva's tone indicated pity for the unfortunate. "Here, this will help," said Helva, substituting a magnifying device in one extension and holding it over the picture. In a kind of shock, the ladies and gentlemen of the committee bent to observe the incredibly copied and brilliantly executed Last Supper on the head of a screw. "Well," remarked the one gentleman who had been forced to accompany his wife, "the good Lord can eat where angels fear to tread." "Are you referring, sir," asked Helva politely, "to the Dark Age discussions on the number of angels who could stand on the head of a pin?" "I had that in mind." "Well, if you substitute atom for angel, the problem is not insoluble given the metallic content of the pin in question." "Which you are programmed to compute?" "Of course." "Did they remember to program a sense of humor as well, young lady?" "We are directed to develop a sense of proportion, sir, which contributes to the same effect." The good man chortled appreciatively and decided the trip was worth his time. If the investigation committee spent months digesting the thoughtful food served them at the laboratory school, they left Helva with a morsel as well. Singing, as applicable to herself, required research. She had, of course, been exposed to and enjoyed a music appreciation course that had included the better-known classical works such as Tristan and Isolde, Candide, Oklahoma, and Nozze di Figaro, along with the Atomic Age singers Bridget Nielsen, Bob Dylan, and Geraldine Todd, as well as the curious rhythmic progressions of the Venusians, Capellan visual chromatics, the sonic concerti of the Alterans, and reticulan croons. But singing, for any shelf person, posed considerable technical difficulties. Shell people were schooled to examine every aspect of a problem or situation before making a prognosis. Balanced properly between optimism and practicality, the non-defeatist attitude of the Shell people that led them to extricate themselves, their ships, and their personnel from bizarre situations. Therefore, to Helva, the problem that she couldn't open her mouth to sing, among other restrictions, did not bother her. She would work out a method, bypassing her limitations, whereby she could sing. She approached the problem by investigating the method of sound reproduction through the centuries, human and instrumental. Her own sound production equipment was essentially more instrumental than vocal. Breath control and proper enunciation of vowel sounds within the oral cavity appeared to require the most development and practice. Shell people did not, strictly speaking, breathe. For their purposes, oxygen and other gases were not drawn from the surrounding atmosphere through the medium of lungs, but sustained artificially by solution in their shells. After experimentation, Helva discovered that she could manipulate her diaphragmatic unit to sustain tone. By relaxing the throat muscles and expanding the oral cavity well into the frontal sinuses, she could direct the vowel sounds into the most felicitous position for proper reproduction through her throat microphone. She compared the results with tape recordings of modern singers and was not unpleased, although her own tapes had a peculiar quality about them, not at all unharmonious, merely unique. Acquiring a repertoire from the laboratory library was no problem to one trained to perfect recall. She found herself able to sing any role and any strong song which struck her fancy. It would not have occurred to her that it was curious for a female to sing bass, baritone, tenor, mezzo-soprano, and coloratura as she pleased. It was to Helva only a matter of the correct reproduction and diaphragmatic control required by the music attempted. If the authorities remarked on her curious avocation, they did so among themselves. Shell people were encouraged to develop a hobby so long as they maintained proficiency in their technical work. On the anniversary of her 16th year, Helva was unconditionally graduated and installed in her ship, the X-Ray Hotel 834. Her permanent titanium shell was recessed behind an even more indestructible barrier in the central shaft of the scout ship. The neural, audio, visual, and sensory connections were made and sealed. Her extendables were diverted, connected, or augmented, and the final delicate beyond description brain taps were completed while Helva remained anesthetically unaware of her proceedings. When she woke, she was the ship. Her brain and intelligence controlled every function from navigation to such loading as a scout ship of her class needed. She could take care of herself and her ambulatory half in any situation already recorded in the annals of Central Worlds, and any situation its most fertile minds could imagine. Her first actual flight, for she and her kind had made mock flights on dummy panels since she was 8, showed her to be a complete master of the techniques of her profession. She was ready for her great adventures and the arrival of her mobile partner. There were 9 qualified scouts sitting around collecting base pay the day Helva reported for active duty. There were several missions that demanded instant attention, but Helva had been of interest to several department heads in Central for some time, and each bureau chief was determined to have her assigned to his section. Opal, do you need to go out on the balcony? Do you require? Is your life so difficult? Okay. Pardon. Try not to bring any flies, okay? Oh, that hurt. Sat on something. No one had remembered to introduce Helva to the prospective partners. The ship always chose its own partner. Had there been another brain ship at the base at the moment, Helva would have been guided to make the first move. As it was, while Central wrangled among itself, Robert Tanner sneaked out of the pilot's barracks, out to the field, and over to Helva's slim metal hull. "Hello? Anyone at home?" Tanner said. "Of course," replied Helva, activating her outside scanners. "Are you my partner?" she asked hopefully, as she recognized the Scout Service uniform. "Well, all you have to do is ask," he retorted in a wistful tone. "No one has come. I thought perhaps there were no partners available, and I've had no directives from Central." Even to herself, Helva sounded a little self-pitying, but the truth was that she was lonely, sitting on the darkened field. She'd always had the company of other shells and, more recently, technicians by the score. The sudden solitude had lost its momentary charm and become oppressive. Well, no directives from Central is scarcely a cause for regret, but there happened to be 8 other guys biting their fingernails to the quick, just waiting for an invitation to board you, you beautiful thing. Tanner was inside the central cabin as he said this, running appreciative fingers over her panel, the scout's gravity chair, poking his head into the cabins, the galley, the head, the pressured storage compartments. "Now, if you want to goose Central and do us a favor all in one, call up the barracks, and let's have a ship-warming partner-picking party, Helva chuckled to herself. He was so completely different from the occasional visitors or the various laboratory techs that she had encountered. He was so gay, so assured, and she was delighted by his suggestion of a partner-picking party. I decided to make a joke, and I buffed the joke. I boofed the joke. Certainly, it was not against anything in her understanding of regulations. CENTCOM, this is X-Ray Hotel 834. Please connect me with Pilot Barracks. Visual? Please. A picture of lounging men in various attitudes of boredom came on her screen. This is the X-Ray Hotel 834. Would the unassigned scouts do me the favor of coming aboard? 8 figures galvanized into action, grabbing pieces of wearing apparel, disengaging tape mechanisms, no capes, disentangling themselves from bedsheets and towels. Helva dissolved the connection while Tanner chuckled gleefully and settled down to await their arrival. Helva was engulfed in an unshell-like flurry of anticipation. No actress on her opening night could have been more apprehensive, fearful, nor breathless. Unlike the actress, she could throw no hysterics, china objects d'art, nor grease paint to relieve her tension. She could, of course, check her stores for edibles and drinks, which she did, serving Tanner from the virgin selection of her commissary. Opal has decided to go to bed. Which means that I shall protect myself from mosquitoes, O best beloved. Scouts were colloquially known as Bronze, as opposed to the ship Brains. They had to pass as rigorous a training program as the Brains, and only the top 1% of each contributory world's highest scholars were admitted to Central World's Scout training program. Consequently, the 8 young men who came pounding up the gantry into Helva's hospitable lock were unusually fine-looking, intelligent, well-coordinated, and adjusted young men, looking forward to a slightly drunken evening. Helva permitting, and all quite willing to do each other dirt to get possession of her. Such a human invasion left Helva mentally breathless, a luxury she thoroughly enjoyed for the brief time she could permit it. She sorted out the young men. Tanner's opportunism amused but did not especially attract her. The blonde Nordson seemed too simple. Dark-haired Alatbe had a kind of obstinacy to which she felt no compassion. Miramin's bitterness hinted at an inner darkness she did not wish to lighten, although he made the biggest outward play for her attention. Hers was a curious courtship. This would be only the first of several marriages for her, for Brons retired after 75 years of service, or earlier if they were unlucky. Brains, their bodies safe from any deterioration, were indestructible, in theory, once a shell person had paid off the massive debt of early care, surgical adaptation, and maintenance charges. He or she was free to seek employment elsewhere. In practice, shell people remained in the service until they chose to self-destruct or died in the line of duty. Helva had actually spoken to one shell person who was 322 years old. She had been so awed by the contact she hadn't presumed to ask the personal questions she had wanted to. Her choice of a Braun did not stand out from the others until Tanner started to sing a scout ditty, recounting the misadventures of the bold, dense, painfully inept Billy Braun. An attempt at harmony resulted in cacophony, and Tanner wagged his arms wildly for silence. What we need is a roaring good lead tenor. Jennan, besides palming aces, what do you sing? Sharp, Jennan replied, in easy good humor. If a tenor is absolutely necessary, I'll attempt it, Helva volunteered. My good woman, Tanner protested. Sound your A. Sound your A, laughed Jennan. Into the stunned silence that followed the rich, clear, high A, Jennan remarked quietly, Such an A Caruso would have given the rest of his notes to sing. It did not take them long to discover her full range. All Tanner asked for was one roaring good lead tenor, Jennan said jokingly, and our sweet mistress supplied us with an entire repertory company. The boy who gets the ship will go far, far, far. To the Horsehead Nebula? Asked Nordsen, quoting an old central saw. To the Horsehead Nebula and back we shall make beautiful music, said Helva, chuckling. Together, Jennan said. Only you'd better make the music, and with my voice, I had better listen. Well, I'd rather imagine it would be I who listened, suggested Helva. Jennan executed a stately bow, with an intricate flourish, to his crushed-brimmed hat. He directed his bow to the central control pillar, He directed his bow towards the central control pillar, where Helva was. Her own personal preference crystallized at that precise moment and for that particular reason. Jennan alone of the men had addressed his remarks directly at her physical presence, regardless of the fact that he knew she could pick up his image wherever he was in the ship, and regardless of the fact that her body was behind massive metal walls. Throughout their partnership, Jennan never failed to turn his head in her direction, no matter where he was in relation to her. In response to this personalization, Helva, at that moment and from then on, always spoke to Jennan only through her central mic, even though that was not always the most efficient method. Helva didn't know that she fell in love with Jennan that evening. As she had never been exposed to love nor affection, only the drier cousins, respect and admiration, she could scarcely have recognized her reaction to the warmth of his personality and his thoughtfulness. As a shell person, she considered herself remote from emotions, largely connected with physical desires. Well, Helva, it's been swell meeting you, said Tanner. It's been swell meeting you, said Tanner, suddenly as she and Jennan were arguing about the baroque quality of Come All Ye Sons of Art. See you in space sometime, you lucky dog, Jennan. Thanks for the party, Helva. You don't have to go so soon, asked Helva, realizing belatedly that she and Jennan had been excluding the others from this discussion. The best man won, Tanner said wryly. Guess I'd better go and get a tape on love ditties. Might need him for the next ship, if there are any more at home like you. Helva and Jennan watched them leave, both a little confused. Perhaps Tanner's jumping to conclusions? Jennan asked. Helva regarded him as he slouched against the console, facing her shell directly. His arms were crossed on his chest, and the glass he had held had been empty for some time. He was handsome, they all were, but his watchful eyes were unwary, his mouth assumed a smile easily, and his voice, to which Helva was particularly drawn, was resonant, deep, and without unpleasant overtones or accent. "Sleep on it at any rate, Helva. Call me in the morning if it's your opt." She called him at breakfast after she had checked her choice through Central. Jennan moved his things aboard, received their joint commission, had his personality and experience file locked into her reviewer, and gave her coordinates for their first mission. The X-Ray Hotel 834 officially became the Juliet Hotel 834. Their first mission was a dull but necessary crash priority. Medical got Helva, rushing a vaccine to a distant planet plagued with a virulent spore disease. They had only to get to Spica as fast as possible. After the initial thrilling forward surge at her maximum speed, Helva realized her muscles were to be given less of a workout than her brawn on this tedious mission, but they did have plenty of time for exploring each other's personalities. Jennan, of course, knew what Helva was capable of as a ship and as a partner, just as she knew what she could expect from him. But these were only facts, and Helva looked forward eagerly to learning that human side of her partner, which could not be reduced to a series of symbols. Nor could the give and the take of two personalities be learned from a book. It had to be experienced. "My father was a scout too, or is that programmed?" began Jennan, their third day out. "Well, naturally." "Unfair, you know. You've got all my family history, and I don't even know one blamed thing about yours." "Well, I've never known either," Helva said. "Until I read yours, it hadn't occurred to me that I must have one too, someplace in Central's files." "Pfft, shell psychology." Helva laughed. "Yes, and I'm even programmed against curiosity about it. And you'd better be too." Jennan ordered a drink, slouched into the gravity couch opposite her, and put his feet on the bumpers, turning himself idly from side to side on the gimbals. "Helva, a made-up name. With a Scandinavian sound." "Well, you aren't blonde," Jennan said positively. "Well, then, there's dark Swedes. And blonde Turks, and this one's harem is limited to one." "Ah, you're a woman in Perda, yes, but you can come to pleasure houses." Helva found herself aghast at the edge of her carefully trained voice. "You know," Jennan interrupted her, deep in some thought of his own, "my father gave me the impression that he was a lot more married to his ship, the Sylvia, than to my mother. I know I used to think of Sylvia as my grandmother. She was a low number, so she must have been a great-grandmother at least. I used to talk to her for hours." "Her registry?" asked Helva, unwittingly jealous of everyone and anyone who had shared his hours. 422. I think she's at Tango Sierra now. I ran into Tom Burgess once." Jennan's father had died of a planetary disease, the vaccine for which his ship had used up curing the local citizens. "Tom said she got mighty tough and salty. You lose your sweetness and I'll come back and haunt you, girl," Jennan threatened. Helva laughed. He startled her by stamping up to the column panel, touching it with light, tender fingers. "I wonder what you look like," he said softly, wistfully. Helva had been briefed about this natural curiosity of scouts. She didn't know anything about herself, and neither of them ever would nor could. "Well, pick any form, shape, and shade, and I'll be yours obliging," she countered, as training suggested. Iron Maiden, I fancy blondes with long tresses, and Jennan pantomimed Lady Godiva-like tresses. "Since you're immolated in titanium, I'll call you Brunhilde, my dear." And he made his bow. With a chortle, Helva launched into the appropriate aria just as Spica made contact. "What in the hell is that yelling about? Who are you? And unless you're Central World Medical, go away! We've got a plague, no visiting privileges!" "My ship is singing. Yes, we're the Juliet Hotel 834 of Worlds, and we've got your vaccine. What are your landing coordinates?" "Your ship is singing?" "The greatest SATB in organized space. Any request?" The Juliet Hotel 834 delivered the vaccine, but no more arias, and received immediate orders to proceed to Leviticus 4. By the time they got there, Jennan found a reputation waiting for him, and was forced to defend the 834's virgin honor. "I'll stop singing," murmured Helva, contritely as she ordered up poultices for the third black eye this week. You will not, Jennan said through gritted teeth. If I have to have black eyes from here to the Horsehead Nebula to keep the snicker out of the title, we'll be the ship who sings. After the ship who sings tangled with a minor but vicious narcotic ring in the Lesser Magellanics, the title became definitively respectful. Central was aware of each episode and punched out a special interest key on Juliet Hotel 834's file. A first-rate team was shaking down well. I am hearing fireworks, so I'm going to turn on the fan so that Opal does not get us sad. I'll be right back. Just juice. I love you, sweetheart. Jennan and Helva considered themselves a first-rate team too after that tidy arrest. Of all the vices in this universe, I hate drug addiction, Jennan remarked, as they headed back to Central. People can go to hell quick enough without that kind of help. Is that why you volunteered for Scout service, to redirect traffic? I'll bet my official answer's on for your review. In far too flowery wording. Carrying on the traditions of my family, which has been proud of 4 generations in service, if I may quote you your own words. Jennan groaned. I was very young when I wrote that. Certainly I hadn't been through the final training, and once I was in final training, my pride wouldn't let me fail. Well, as I mentioned, I used to visit Dad on board Sylvia, and I've a very good idea that she might have had her eye on me as a replacement for my father, because I had a massive doses of Scout-oriented propaganda. It took. From the time I was 7, I was going to be a Scout or else. He shrugged as if deprecating a youthful determination that had taken a great deal of mature application to bring to fruition. Ah, so... Scout Sahir Silan of the Juliet Sierra 422 penetrating into the Horsehead Nebula? Jennan chose to ignore her sarcasm. With you, I may even get that far, but even with Sylvia's nudging, I never daydreamed of myself that kind of glory in my wildest flights of fancy. I'll leave the whoppers to your agile brain henceforth. I have in mind a smaller contribution to space history. So modest? No, practical. We also serve, etc. He placed a dramatic hand on his heart. Glory hound, scoffed Helva. Ah, look who's talking. My nebula-bound friend. At least I'm not greedy. There'll only be one hero like my dad at Parcea, but I would like to be remembered for some kudo. Everyone does. Why else do or die? Your father died on his way back from Parcea, if I may point out some very cogent facts, so he could never have known that he was a hero for damming the flood with his ship, which kept Parcean colony from being abandoned, which gave them a chance to discover the anti-paralytic qualities of Parcea, which he never knew. I know, said Jennan softly. Helva was immediately sorry for the tone of her rebuttal. She knew very well how deep Jennan's attachment to his father had been. On his review, a note was made that he had rationalized his father's loss with the unexpected and welcome outcome of the affair at Parcea. Facts are not human, Helva. My father was, and so am I, and, basically, so are you. Check over your dial, 834. Amid all the wires attached to you is a heart. An underdeveloped human heart, obviously. I apologize, Jennan, she said. Jennan hesitated for a moment, threw out his hands in acceptance, and then tapped her shell affectionately. If they ever take us off these milk runs, we'll make a stab at the nebula, huh? As so frequently happened in the scout service, within the next hour they had orders to change course, not to the nebula, but to a recently colonized system with 2 habitable planets, one tropical and one glacial. The sun, named Ravel, had become unstable. The spectrum was that of a rapidly expanding shell with absorption lines rapidly displacing towards violet. The augmented heat of the primary had already forced evacuation of the nearer world, Daphne. The pattern of spectral emissions gave indication that the sun would sear Chloe as well. All ships in the immediate spatial vicinity were to report to disaster headquarters on Chloe to effect removal of the remaining colonists. The Juliet Hotel 834 obediently presented itself and was sent to outlying areas on Chloe to pick up scattered settlers who did not appear to appreciate the urgency of the situation. Chloe, indeed, was enjoying the first temperatures above freezing since it had been flung out of its parent. Since many of the colonists were religious fanatics who had settled on rigorous Chloe to fit themselves for a life of pious reflection, Chloe's abrupt thaw was attributed to sources other than a rampaging sun. Jennan had to spend so much time countering specious arguments that he and Helva were behind schedule on their way to the 4th and last settlement. Helva jumped over the high range of jagged peaks that surrounded and sheltered the valley from the former raging snows as well as the present heat. The violent sun, with its flaring corona, was just beginning to brighten the deep valley as Helva dropped down on the landing. "They'd better grab their toothbrushes and hop aboard," Helva said. "HQ says speed it up." "All women," remarked Jennan in surprise as he walked down to meet them. "Unless the men on Chloe wear furred skirts. Charm 'em, but pare the routine to bare essentials and turn on your two-way private." Jennan advanced, smiling, but his explanation of his mission was met with absolute incredulity and considerable doubt as to its authenticity. He groaned inwardly as the matriarch paraphrased previous explanations of the warming sun. Reverend Mother, there's been an overload on that prayer circuit and the sun is blowing itself up in one obliging burst. I'm here to take you to the spaceport at Rosary." "That Sodom!" The worthy woman glowered and shuddered disdainfully at this suggestion. "We thank you for your warning, but we have no wish to leave our cloister for the rude world. We must go about our morning meditation, which has been interrupted. It'll be permanently interrupted when that sun starts broiling you. You must come now," Jennan said firmly. "Madam," said Helva, realizing that perhaps a feminine voice might carry a little more weight in this instance than Jennan's very masculine charm. "Who spoke?" cried the nun, startled by the bodiless voice. "I, Helva, the ship. Under my protection, you and your sisters in faith may enter safely and be unprofaned by association with a male. I will guard you and take you safely to a place that is prepared for you." The matriarch peered cautiously into the ship's open port. "Since only Central Worlds is permitted to use of such ships, I acknowledge that you are not trifling with us, young man. However, we are in no danger here." "The temperature at Rosary is now 99 degrees, said Helva. "As soon as the sun's rays penetrate directly into this valley, it will also be 99, and it is due to climb to approximately 180 today. I notice your buildings are made of wood, with moss chinking. Dry moss. It should fire about noontime." The sunlight was beginning to slant into the valley through the peaks, and the fierce rays warmed the restless group behind the matriarch. Several opened the throats of their furry parkas. "Jennan," said Helva privately to him, "our time is very short. I can't leave them, Helva. Some of those girls are barely out of their teens." "Pretty, too. No wonder the matriarch doesn't want to get in." "Helva." "It will be the Lord's will," said the matriarch, stoutly, and turned her back squarely on the rescue. "To burn to death?" shouted Jennan as she threaded her way back through the murmuring disciples. "They want to be martyrs, they're opt, Jennan," said Helva dispassionately. "We must leave, and that is no longer a matter of opinion." "How can I leave, Helva?" "Parseia?" Helva asked tauntingly as he stepped forward to grab one of the women. You can't drag them all aboard, and we don't have the time to fight it out. Get on board, Jennan, or I'll have you on report. But they'll die, muttered Jennan dejectedly as he reluctantly turned to climb on board. You can only risk so much, Helva said sympathetically. As it is, we'll just barely have time to make up a rendezvous. Lab reports, a critical speed-up in spectral evolution. Jennan was already in the airlock when one of the younger women, screaming, rushed to the squeeze in the closing port. Her action set off the others. They stampeded through the narrow opening. Even crammed back to breast, there was not enough room inside for all the women. Jennan broke out spacesuits to the three who would have to remain with him in the airlock. He wasted valuable time in explaining to the matriarch that she must put on the suit because the airlock had no independent oxygen nor cooling units. We'll be caught, said Helva in a grim tone to Jennan on their private connection. We've lost 18 minutes in that last-minute rush. Now I am overloaded for maximum speed, and I must attain maximum speed to outrun the heat wave. Can you lift? We're suited. Lift? Yes, she said, doing so. Run? I stagger. Jennan, bracing himself and the women, could feel her sluggishness as she blasted upward. Heartlessly, Helva applied thrust as long as she could, despite the fact that the gravitational force smashed her cabin passengers brutally and crushed two fatally. It was a question of saving as many as possible. The only one for whom she had any concern was Jennan, and she was in desperate terror about his safety. Airless and uncooled, protected by only one layer of metal and not three, the airlock was not going to be safe for the four trapped there, despite their spacesuits. These were only the standard models, not built to withstand the excessive heat to which the ship would be subjected. Helva ran as fast as she could, but the incredible wave of heat from the explosive sun caught them halfway to cold safety. She paid no heed to the cries, moaned, pleas, and prayers from in the cabin. She listened only to Jennan's tortured breathing, to the missing throb in his suit's purifying system, and the sucking of the overloading cooling unit. Helpless, she heard the hysterical screams of his three companions as they writhed in the awful heat. Vainly, Jennan tried to calm them, tried to explain that they would soon be safe and cool if they could be still and endure the heat. Undisciplined by their terror and torment, they tried to strike out at him despite the close quarters. One flailing arm became entangled in the leads to his power pack, and the damage was quickly done. A connection, weakened by heat and dead weight of the arm, broke. For all the power at her disposal, Helva was helpless. She watched as Jennan fought for his breath, as he turned his head beseechingly towards her, and died. Only the iron conditioning of her training prevented Helva from swinging round and plunging back into the cleansing heart of the exploding sun. Numbly she made rendezvous with the refugee convoy. She obediently transferred her burned, heat-prostrated passengers to the assigned transport. I will retain the body of my scout and proceed to the nearest base for burial, she informed Central dully. You will be provided escort, was the reply. I need no escort. Escort is provided, X-Ray Hotel 834, she was told curtly. The shock of hearing Jennan's initials severed from her call number cut off her half-formed protest. Stunned, she waited by the transport until her screen showed the arrival of two more slim brain ships. The cortege proceeded homeward at unfunereal speeds. More fireworks. 834, the ship who sings. I have no more songs. Your scout was Jennan. I do not wish to communicate. I am 422. Sylvia? Sylvia died a long time ago. I'm 422, currently Mike Sierra. The ship rejoined curtly. Alpha Hotel 640 is our other friend, but Henry's not listening in. Just as well, he wouldn't understand it if you wanted to turn rogue, but I'd stop him if he tried to deter you. Rogue? The term snapped Helva out of her apathy. Sure, you're young, you've got power for years. Skip. Others have done it. 732 went rogue over 20 years ago, after she lost her scout on a mission to that white dwarf. Hasn't been seen since. I never heard about rogues. Well, it's exactly the thing we're conditioned against. You sure wouldn't hear about it in school, my dear, 422 said. Break conditioning? Cried Helva, anguished, thinking longingly of the white, furious hot heart of the son she had just left. For you, I don't think it would be hard at the moment, 422 said quietly, her voice devoid of her earlier cynicism. The stars are out there, winking. Alone? Cried Helva from her heart. Alone, 422 confirmed bleakly. Alone with all of space and time. Even the Horsehead Nebula would not be far enough away to daunt her. Alone with 100 years to live with her memories and nothing more. Was Parcea worth it? She asked, 422 softly. Parcea? 422 repeated, surprised. With his father? Yes. We were there at Parcea when we were needed, just as you and his son were at Chloe. When you were needed, the crime is not knowing where is need and not being there. Sorry. The crime is not knowing where need is and not being there. But I need him. Who will supply my need? Said Helva bitterly. 834, said 422 after a day's silent speeding. Central wishes your report. Our placement awaits your opt at Regulus base. Change course accordingly. A replacement? That certainly was not needed, a reminder inadequately filling the void Jennan had left. Why, her hull was barely cool of Chloe's heat. Atavistically, Helva wanted time to mourn Jennan. Oh, none of them are impossible if you're a good ship, 422 remarked philosophically. And it is just what you need, the sooner the better. You told them that I wouldn't go rogue, didn't you? Helva said. The moment passed you even as it passed me after Parcea, and before that, after Glen Arthur and Betelgeuse. We're conditioned to go on, aren't we? We can't go rogue. You were testing. I had to. Orders. Not even Psyche knows why a rogue occurs. Central's very worried, and so, daughter, are your sister ships. I asked to be your escort. I don't want to lose both of you. In her emotional nadir, Helva could feel a flood of gratitude for Sylvia's rough sympathy. We've all known this grief, Helva. It's no consolation, but if we couldn't feel it with our scouts, we'd only be machines wired for sound. Helva looked at Jennan's still form stretched before her in its shroud and heard the echo of his rich voice in the quiet cabin. Sylvia couldn't help him, she cried from her soul. Yes, dear, I know, 422 murmured gently, and then was quiet. The three ships sped on, wordless to the great Central World's base at Regulus. Helva broke silence to acknowledge landing instructions and officially tendered regrets. The three ships set down simultaneously at the wooded edge where Regulus, gigantic blue trees, stood sentinel over the sleeping dead in the small service cemetery. The entire base complement approached with measured step and formed an aisle from Helva to the burial ground. The honored detail, out of step, walked slowly into her cabin. Reverently, they placed the body of her dead love on the wheeled bier, covered it honorably in deep blue, star-splashed flag of the service. She watched as it was driven slowly down the living aisle, which closed in behind the bier in last escort. Then, as the simple words of interment were spoken, as the atmosphere planes dipped in tribute over the open grave, Helva found voice for her lonely farewell. Softly, barely audible at first, the strains of the ancient song of evening and requiem swelled to the final poignant measure until black space itself echoed back the sound of the ship who sang. So, well, and like I said the first time I read this, if people can hate you without knowing a single thing about you, then I can love you for exactly the same reason. So, you have much more important things to do than listen to me jabber. So, get some rest and do your best. And try to grow into someone that you can be proud of. And sleep well. You'll see me next time.